All right, welcome everybody. We're going to get started here in 1 or 2 minutes. We're going to let everyone have a chance to join. So excited to be able to share some real life scenarios with AI, both Copilot, Claude, all the different AI tooling that's out there. And we'll give everyone a minute. Everyone's probably trying to eat lunch and get into the session. So we'll give everyone about 30 more seconds and then we'll get started. All right. With that, welcome everybody. So excited to talk about AI again. For those who've been following along, this is our third AI focused webinar. Today, we're going to really focus on some scenarios around what does cost control look like, utilizing tools when they make sense, being chat going up into co-work style tooling. I want to go ahead and introduce my team members that are presenting with me today. Megan Walker, who's our CFO here at RedHelm. She's going to be giving us financial, perspective on AI. We all know that, the finances behind AI are challenging, to say the least. I think, Megan, you probably agree with that, given some of the conversations we've had. I'm also so happy to be joined by Lee Cavalier from one of our partners at IT by Design. He is someone that I regularly go to ask questions where I need someone to bounce ideas off of when it comes to actually implementing agentic AI, but also utilizing everyday AI. So welcome, guys. My name's Chris Risher. I am the lead advisor and I lead advisory as well as digital innovation here at RedHelm. And I'll be the moderator for today. And with that, we can go ahead and we're going to jump right into a poll. If we could have someone put the poll up, I want to understand, where is everyone's organization today with AI spend governance? And don't be scared of this question. I have a pretty good idea of what the answer will be. It's fine. And pretty interested to see what everyone says to this. Lee, what do you think the answer is going to be for the most part?
I
You had
think
a
we're
guess.
gonna I think we're gonna be on the lower rung of the ladder
Yeah.
in
Okay, we're
general,
not.
and
Yeah, I'm seeing a
which
lot.
is okay, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Kind of where
absolutely.
we're at.
I think it's and there's going to be an example of up market that I'm going to show in just a moment here, that no one's alone in this. This is a tough subject to. I would say that we are being very, very bold with this webinar because it's a tough subject to attack, and it's very here and now. So I'm gonna go ahead and end the poll because I think we got a lot of people that already participated. Um, Let me share the results. All right, so kind of what we thought might be the case. We do have a few people that really impressed. We've got some people that are already doing role-based access and approval workflows for access into individual tooling. Got one person that says they're tracking usage, but are struggling to prove value. That last part, proving value, is always hard because it takes context to prove value. What's your first initial reaction, Lee and Megan, to the results here?
I would say that fully aligns with what I expect most companies to be at in their AI journey right now.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'd second that, and then I'd toss out there the not sure doesn't surprise me either, right? I mean, until you're dedicating time and attention to it, not just as a piece of paperwork, whatever governance or AUP you're putting in place, like the not sure makes a whole lot of sense if you haven't dedicated that kind of structure and attention.
yeah, okay. So let's actually dive into the problem we're going to look at today. Like we kind of hinted at it with that poll, right? Usage can be visible, but the value's fuzzy, and it's hard to attribute where the value is to a specific process. But more specifically, more to what I said earlier, we have large companies that are struggling with this. Uber basically used up their entire 2026 budget of AI in a 4-month span of time. You can read through the other two, but I think that's the one that I anchor on often is that Uber example. Megan, curious question. From a finance perspective, what makes AI spend different from a normal software license?
Well, I think that Uber example is perfect for it, right? It doesn't have the same predictability as a normal software license. That's usually by license, by month, something you can track and you can manage. When it comes to AI, there are some models that still have that by usage by month. But then when you get into the tokens, when you get into the Uber world, it's very hard to be able to estimate and potentially even maintain or contain the overall AI spend that you're going to incur.
Where do you think that improper usage maybe starts with and drives additional costs? I mean, Lee, Megan, either one of you can answer this question, but where do you think it starts with? So
Well,
this could
I'll
be a
say
theory right now because we're going to test that in just a moment.
yeah, so I'll say personally, for me, it's part of how mature I am in using an AI model, right? The system itself can be very powerful and very useful, but if you don't know how to use it efficiently, what, in other words, could take a system, an AI model, a little amount of tokens, if we use that word, or time can expand exponentially if you don't know how to most efficiently use the systems and are mature in that capacity.
Yeah, absolutely, Megan. And from an individual's perspective, that's 100% true. And then organizationally, I think it comes from the best of intentions. Both fronts, I think it comes from the best of intentions, right? Individuals want to learn how to do this better, how to use these tools, and organizations want to encourage it, right? But if there's no training surrounding it, if there's no governance in place, if tools are just allocated without much in the way of consideration or reasoning, that immaturity expands and grows exponentially, the costs of it.
I think Calvin posted an interesting question already in the chat. Can I assume that larger organizations have set up governance structure around AI versus smaller organizations? I think our example kind of just a little bit answered that question because I think Calvin, you asked that question before we came up with that first slide that has some examples. But Lee, what are your initial thoughts there?
I will say that, we work very closely with hundreds of organizations of various sizes. And we're talking, 5 million MRR I'm sorry, ARR to 150, 250 and up, right? So to assume that a larger organization has more structure around it sounds right, but I will say that the governance doesn't get easier as they get larger. So even if they are well-intentioned and doing the right things, it's not always a fair assumption to think that they're going to be set up for better success in the actual practice of it.
I think that's a really good segue to my next question for you, Lee.
Yeah, sure.
From a practitioner perspective, where does leadership typically get AI measurement wrong?
Yeah, raw. So leadership gets this wrong the same way almost every metrics program gets it wrong early on, right? They're going to grab a number that's easiest to pull. So in this case, we're talking about seats, prompts, sessions, usage. And then they're going to treat that as though it equates directly to value when it's really just indicating activity usage. So here at IT by Design, I run a product organization that includes both a service delivery arm and an AI agent portfolio. So I get to watch the candle burn from both ends, so to speak. Raw usage tells you someone touched the tool, but it doesn't tell you the impact of that touch, whether AI directly produced the deliverable, influenced an outcome by shaping the decision a human still made, assisted by removing friction from work a human was always going to do, or if it was purely operational and keeping something running in the background. And those are four very different value stories. So leadership tends to collapse those into one number on a dashboard or a small subset of numbers. And that's, I think, the biggest mistake. But the fix for that, it's not more tracking. It's really it's really asking the question before you even pull a report, which of those four value stories are we trying to attribute here and improve here? And if you get that framework right at the start, then the usage numbers mean something out the gate.
Yeah, I think the thing that comes to mind, because we're doing a webinar right now,
Yeah.
and there are things that come after a webinar, not that we're trying to push a specific product or service here. This is purely educational. But if you talk to our sales organization, obviously they want to see something happen from this. But I can't necessarily say if someone uses AI to help prepare for a webinar, and that webinar later results in sales opportunities, am I literally going to say that, oh, AI was the reason why we got all those sales opportunities?
Yeah, yeah. And if you've got if you've got a sales associate, a sales assistant, right? It's no different. You're looking at something that facilitated an outcome, and you need to evaluate what contribution that
Yeah.
tool, that person, that process had to that outcome.
And that's why, attribution is a very, like, business attribution, it relies on a lot of context. And it's hard to create. There would be some companies that will create ledgers where one problem with that is it's becoming it would be manual, because I have to literally say, this is the thing I created, and this was the outcome from it. That latter part is my opinion, right? That's not necessarily a fact, but the facts say that at least the AI assisted with it. How much is a context thing?
Yeah, sorry, Chris. Yeah, absolutely. Especially when you're talking about business outcomes, right? It's easier when you're looking at, a subset of agentic opportunities, like in service delivery as a model or finance as a model, and you're looking at a specific workflow or task. It's easier to attribute what the outcome was to the tool. But when you're talking about business outcomes, revenue, sales, it becomes a lot more esoteric, a lot less tangible.
Yeah. So I think that this plays well into what we're gonna do next. We're gonna look at kind of a pre-created flow that I've done, because I want to be able to give people some tools, and then we're gonna talk about it as we go. I'm gonna ask Megan a question immediately once we look at the very first prompt that I create. So you're gonna see two different windows. We're gonna look at the left side of my window first, because I want to focus on Copilot for just a moment. So let me frame up the scenario a little bit. Scenario is we're trying to do a client renewal. We're not going to focus too much on what the content is that comes out of the flows. We're going to focus on what was the most efficient flow? What was the least costly option that I go with that gets me enough of an outcome or the needed outcome? Because that's how, in my head, I start defending the different tools that I start utilizing. And then that's how I become more mature. So the first step in any, prompt or planning to use when I'm planning to use AI, I'm just going to write a prompt. Help me get ready for a client renewal. All right, Megan, if I came to you and said, help me get ready for a client renewal, what's your response going to be?
My response would be happy to. I either need more details and context, or I'm going to give you a very generic response based on what I think is most likely going to happen. But if you want it to be the most effective, I'm going to need a lot more. Who's the client? What's the term date? What do they sell? What do they purchase? Lots more information to actually provide something that you can then take and reasonably transition. So,
and just like a human, AI responds exactly the same way. Now, one thing I will call out, and that we're going to bring up a couple of times, Copilot Chat, at least for right now, don't quote me on this like 2 years down the road, Copilot Chat is an all-you-can-eat model. It is closed model. It's holding only the things that are within the organization. It's not going off and selling that data somewhere else. It's not ended up in someone else's model, an answer for somebody else, like it might be in a free option. However, it's not going to try to step you through a process either. So we have to kind of treat it like a human. If I ask a dumb question, probably going to get a dumb answer, right? So if I then kind of say, all right, I understand. Let me try to figure out how to frame up a better prompt. And like a lot of people, I get writer's block, and I get writer's block often. So my typical approach is to actually use a prompt coach. Ask AI what it needs to build a prompt for me. One with lots of context, potentially even telling me how to approach the problem, because there are going to be a couple different scenarios that it calls out for me, and then what documentation I might have to provide. So I start with, I need a prompt that will help me prepare for a client renewal conversation. Before writing the final prompt, I'm literally asking it, what context do you need? By the way, for those that are in Copilot, there is an agent inside the store called Prompt Coach. This is something to help people frame up their prompts, but any of the tools either have an agent or you just say, I want you to be my prompt coach. This is what I'm trying to do. And you're literally just asking AI to frame up the prompt for you. But one thing that I'm going to call out in a little while is, how should I run this at a later point? Should I just do as a single prompt or a thing called a prompt chain? Or do you think I'm justified to go to cowork? So it asks a bunch of questions and I give it the answers. And now I've gone from a single line prompt to 74 lines. Immediate reaction. What are your thoughts, Megan? You're muted.
Man, yeah, sorry. uh, Obviously, I would say this is going to be much more useful information to deliver, Chris, for you to use the system effectively and efficiently rather than just the blocking and tackling. It gives more direction, it's more specific, more contextually driven of what you actually needed from the system.
Yeah. And since this is all you can eat, I'm not going to spend more because it's Copilot if I'm less efficient. But there's other work I could have been doing. So if I'm more efficient with the AI tool, the business is doing better because I'm more efficient personally, right? And I'm getting more out of the response. Something I didn't add in here was, hey, also tell me, should I run this as a single prompt, a prompt chain, a chain of different questions with needing context, and I might flow it over from one to the next, and we'll look at that in just a moment, or a Copilot or co-work style session. And then it's giving me what the prompt architecture, if you will, should be. Now, I think I'm seeing some questions in the chat. Are there any questions in there currently?
No, I think we're up to speed.
Okay, gotcha. All right. Sorry, I can't see all the windows all at the same time, but it's already started to plan out how I should do this thing. It's telling me, yeah, go do a prompt chain. Now, something that it did not do, if you start looking through this, it's saying, these are all the things you should do, and these are the inputs and the outputs you should get. What do you think is missing from this? What did it not give me? It didn't give me the actual prompts for each step, which, that happens sometimes. You got to actually say, hey, I've got these things for you. Tell me what you actually want me to say in the next step for each one of these. It did give me feedback on when it probably makes sense to do a co-work style. So it's kind of on the fence about the best approach. and where you should go from there. But I'm going to show both approaches quickly. Okay. Anything to add, Lee?
Uh, just that you proved what I was thinking when you asked of first impressions of going from one line to 74, which was we still need to look at that line. We still need to look at those 74 lines.
Yep,
Because
absolutely.
Megan's right, it's going to get you a much better output, assuming that it has shared, what you actually needed. And so this just clarifies something that we'll say probably again and again. There's no replacement for human judgment yet.
Yep. And I think that when I'm going to ask you a question later about how you feel about AI looping on itself and when human interaction needs to occur, right? So if we take this prompt chain approach, we can, sorry about that. Move on to step 3. And the step 3 was the single prompt that it created for me. And I get pretty good feedback. And this is where the human interaction comes in. I have to go look at this, and it's going to happen between the single prompt, the prompt chain, as well as the cowork style. And I have to make a judgment call. One, I need to look at the prompt that it created. Where did it get it wrong? Now I'm going to look at the single prompt, and I got all this stuff. Is it good enough? Is it enough context? Did I get enough value out of it? Or do I need to go to the next step up? I think that's right to, Megan and Lee, your point that we still need human interaction to find out what good looks like. And that's all like opinion based. Now, let's say that, I don't think it was good enough. So I'm gonna move up to the next rung where it said, use this prompt chain. And you can see that was step 1. Got all that output. And in step 2, it said utilize this output from step 1 in step 2 in that prompt. I think it's all a single text, but it's in here somewhere where it literally says use all the output from the previous as input for the next. And that happens on step 3 and step 4. What is this starting to feel like to you, Lee? What does a prompt chain start to feel like after a while?
Like we're building out a workflow.
Yeah. Right? And if the workflow happens really often, this is a client renewal, probably happens often.
Yep.
What does that mean that we're going to consider? Doesn't mean we're going to do it,
Right.
but we're going to consider later.
It means we're going to consider where we can get gains from automation and AI, right? We want to see where decision making is a requirement, but anything shy of that, if it's a repeatable task that follows a standard operating procedure, we have an opportunity there to let something agentic do its work.
Mm-hmm. Now, I still pause here and I start to think about, is this good enough? Is this enough for me to walk into the client and have, if you read through the content, we're not going to go through the content specifically, but inside this, made up scenario, the client has a couple of complaints and there are going to be objections that the client comes up with. One of the outputs in here is what is we would look at as an objection matrix. How do I handle some of these objections? And it's really just kind of role play occurring, right? The AI is trying to step us down a path of role play. If I decide that this stuff isn't like all this isn't good enough, and I'm like, okay, the next way we move up from this even is an agentic or co-work style approach. Now, at RedHelm, our strategy is we're stacking licenses. We use Copilot as our base license, and then we use Claude on top of that because I'll talk about it later. provides some level of predictability. And we'll talk about that in a moment. But for me, there's two approaches within cowork. It's cowork with notes or no notes. Now you have to specifically tell it to take notes. Now, before I even look at what the outputs are, I'm not even going to look at the outputs. I'm really going to go to the bottom line of how much did it cost to produce the outputs. But just in your head, if I were to say one's going to be with notes and one's not going to be with notes, Megan, just think about which do you think is going to perform better and why?
Yeah, I'd imagine the one with notes because similar to when you're doing an everyday task, when I'm doing an everyday task, especially if as complexity gets greater, if you need to keep referencing something or you want to make sure you're being efficient and focused, you're going to look at what you did previously. You're going to look at your notes. If you don't have that guide, that's when anything can go off the rails at that point. You said it earlier, right? AI, just think of it as another human you're giving tasks to. It'd be the same impact or effect if it was a staff you were giving it to or an engineer, things like that. It's just a computer.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And I'm gonna push straight to the bottom line. Let's take a look at it's similar content. I've looked at this. We're not gonna go into the specifics of what content it created. You can ask Claude, hey, give me an estimate of how many tokens it took you to create this content. Without the notes, 1.4 to 1.8 million tokens. Now, don't they take that to the bank? It is an estimate. It's more intended to be directionally accurate. So then we can compare it to our other, this thing is, our other flow with notes, 400 to 450,000 tokens. So conservatively, we're at least saving 50% tokens. Just purely on these numbers, we're saving 67% at least. Conservatively, it's 50% tokens because it was able to loop back on its notes. Hold on to that phrase for a moment, loop. It was able to loop back on its notes and keep on learning on its own versus I got to ask a bunch of questions and let me re-ask the questions. I don't know if anyone, show of hands, has anyone had, when you get into when you're working with AI, had it ask the same question it asked probably, or some version of it, maybe 5, 6, 7 turns ago? That's it losing. It's called context rot. It's losing that context in the session live in front of you. And I've had that happen so many times. I'll kind of learn from it from a year and a half, 2 years doing this. You kind of learn weird tricks about you're almost like tricking AI, but it's really, you're teaching it like you would teach a human, like a kid. If you don't take notes, you're going to forget stuff. That's normal. Anything you would add there, Lee?
Rachel Batista just said, yes, very frustrating. And I just seconded that. Yeah, I mean, the fact is, the tool is an iterative tool and it's learning as it goes. And it, just like anything else, has finite resource. And in this case, we're talking memory, right? So the notes is a good opportunity to minimize the impact of that because it has something to circle back to, as you explained, Chris. That said, there are a couple of things that, from a governance perspective, kind of raise flags when I think about that. I don't know if you want me to go into those, offer
I was
those.
going to ask you that later, but you absolutely go ahead and talk about it.
I mean, so there are two things that really come to mind. Every time the system is writing its own notes, it's taking its own script, right? So that it has something to circle back to, so it doesn't have to re-ask and it avoids rework and token consumption ultimately. Good things. That said, when it's doing that, it's creating this brand new artifact, right? So it's a new document, so to speak. So when we get into talking about governance, it's going to be important that we recognize that this document needs coverage under whatever policies we've got in place, as well as any initial work that or pre-existing documentation. And then the second aspect of that, we want to make sure we know who has access to these things, where they live long term,
Hmm.
how we retain them, or do we just tell the system that it's going to destroy at the end of the session? So these are, like I said before, tied to the governance component of it, but they're non-negotiables that have to happen.
Yeah, and I'll shameless plug here. If you go on our YouTube site and you look back to last summer, we went through an AI usage policy. Now you started hinting at the data retention policy a little bit, right? The marked so it does notes in a thing called a markdown file. But those files are context that can be used in another flow for something completely different or something related or something like that. And you end up trying to figure out, well, how does my data retention policy factor into what those markdown files look like? Because those are now potentially intellectual property of the organization. So
Yeah,
like,
and they can and will sometimes contain details that unintentionally, right? Unintentionally put the organization at risk. So definitely important to be keeping policy around those as well.
hey, Megan, I know, so the way that we work, that co-work is just a stacked on license. But let's say that there was a credit cost. So like on Microsoft in the Copilot model, it is you pay per credit. Whether that's you're paying up front, I'm going to say, all right, $10,000, I'm willing to spend $10,000 on credits for the entire year across my organization utilizing Copilot credits. If like the flow that we're about to go through has high business value, and let's say it's a very big contract we're trying to renew, and I get things done, a week in advance, does that start to justify the cost potentially of a credit, depending on what the size of the contract is?
Sure. And in general, I'd go back to what Lee said as far as kind of four different ways for there to be value, right? And Chris, you even said it in the sense of, hey, with the better prompts, it makes me more efficient. Yes, sometimes it makes it hard to quantify that, but that's ultimately what, from a finance perspective, I'm looking for is how does it replace or supplement other costs? Could be human in nature, could be other IT architecture in nature, but what is that trade-off that I'm looking at from a financial perspective to determine, is it worth it? I'm also looking at in the sense of, hey, there may be a one-time, I'll say larger sunk cost where you are using a token or per usage to help develop a process. But then, so I'll say internally, RedHelm, one of the approaches we're trying to take is let's use I'm using Claude specifically with it, but let's use a Claude instance to develop a process, especially if it's a workflow, you mentioned it, that can be consistent and repeatable, and then actually use Claude to help me develop that in a cheaper IT environment or a cheaper solution if you know you want it iterative in nature. So I'd say it's really about getting value for what you're spending. And that's assessing how much time is it potentially saving? How often is it going to have to occur? Things like that to also determine what's the best AI use. As we talked about, there's also different levels. So,
And there's two pieces of that I would focus on. One is, hey, did you find a use case that makes sense? And did you document it? How you guys are doing it? Because too many times we have conversations about, I want AI to fix all my problems without actually having a conversation about what's the use case you're trying to attack. Have you documented it? Because without documentation, at least understanding how you're doing it right now, we can't determine what makes sense for automating it. So again, same thing, Lee, from a governance standpoint, would you add anything to what Megan said?
From a governance standpoint, yeah, absolutely. It's well, first to your point, yeah, absolutely. If it's repeatable and recurring, you're going to find ROI. You're going to find opportunity for ROI in those workflows and those tasks. Uh, with regards to keeping track of it and spend, I mean, there's going to be a real challenge in continuing on as we go on in defining where are we looking to determine what constitutes that value. Uh, and what I mentioned before, I stand by, right? If the workflow has a direct output, that's an easy win, right? How much time did I save? And what was the cost of the resource that would have dedicated that time and those man hours? Uh, but not everything, in fact, most things, I would argue, in the general day-to-day friction that's caused by manual tasks, uh, most things don't fall into quite that easy a category where the output is that direct.
Yeah. And the second thing I wanted to bring up earlier is getting visibility to what you're saving. That in dashboard. We've saved, 360 hours of the last 3 months on this one automation, making sure that visibility makes it, to the ELT, to the board level, so they understand what, we made this investment. What have I saved? To Megan's point earlier, I want to be able to see that visibly at the end of the day. So
Yeah, and defining that early on is really important, right? What is the mechanism by which I'm tracking? What does good look like, right? We have a target for savings, just like any other IT initiative. You need to know before you go.
yeah, thank you. So what did we see? What was I literally stepping through? We were stepping through escalations in utilizing AI tooling so that I can decide at what level I had the good outcome, enough outcome, right? Because as I step higher, it becomes more quote unquote costly from a dollars perspective. So we got to utilize all the tools in our tool belt, just like any other platform. We're going to utilize all the tools in our tool belt to get to the best outcome with the least cost, or what is acceptable outcome with the least cost, therefore increasing our value of the usage. So we went from a plain prompt, which had, absolutely no value whatsoever, to utilizing our prompt coach to augment what is in our head and making it something that is more consumable for the AI. It told us you should probably use a prompt chain, and we got some strong output out of that. Now, just for exercise sake, we decided to move up into the co-work style, but it just gives us a really good framing of what that escalation can look like and how we can utilize AI to help us make good decisions based on the use case at an end user level. All of these same methods and these same methodologies can be applied to agentic. It's just starting low level, depending on the maturity of the organization. This is a one step in a direction. One thing, there's one more question I want to ask Megan. If I had a use case that was considerably more complex, and this isn't a difficult question, it's the obvious answer. So exceedingly more complex, what do you think would have happened without the notes, given the cost that you saw?
Yeah, they would have continuously increased, right? As you add complexity without direction, just say like a human, they're going to spin. It's going to think, it's going to take time and energy and effort. And so it just can very quickly grow the usage in the time
And
step.
and we all know about the hallucinations then that's no different than what happens with a human. I thought I remembered this part of it, so that's definitely what happened. So that's what's going to go into my response. That's definitely what happened, right? So the notes, back to what I said earlier, helps with a thing called context rot, which can combat hallucinations. All right, so back to your earlier statement, Lee. So we're going to let it take its own notes, loop over that. And I think you called out a question earlier. From a governance seat, what worries you about the AI keeping its own working notes? In particular, this was about a client's contract and ticket history across, a specific session.
Yeah. Yeah,
You might end up repeating yourself, but let's dive into that for just a moment.
yeah, we can. I'll reiterate, and if people have questions they want to post in the chat, please do. But really, what we're looking at here is two big issues, not issues, but hurdles. Two things you need to be paying attention to, right? Uh, those notes, the tool is creating it itself. It's not necessarily. It's prompted by the user. It's tied to the user's inputs, but it's a brand new artifact. So knowing that it needs to inherit the same data classification as the contract or ticket data or whatever it is that it's built from, right? And that doesn't just get passed along because it's internal scratch work. The source is client confidential, then the notes are client confidential, and we need to ascribe it as such. The second thing that I hinted at earlier was, who can see this? Where does it live? How long do we retain it? And we really need to have those defined answers in our governance framework. Uh, but then again, it's also important to note the upside next to the worry, right? And when done well, these maintained notes, it's a well-maintained notes file is most of the way to being an audit trail, which is a huge help.
And this is, I kind of hinted at earlier, there's a new phrase out there. I think this phrase, honestly, the concept of this phrase is not new. It's been really in product management for a very long time. You build a thing, you review how it does, and then reiterate. And you're constantly doing that. Now we're calling it loop engineering. And this is kind of the beginning of it. I'm not going to go too crazy into that. I'm going to leave that for another session. But this is the beginning of loop engineering. You're allowing the AI to do a thing, review the thing, review outcomes from the thing, and get better, and then keep on going in that loop. And we'll bring that topic up at a later point. But this is the beginning of it. So let's shift a little bit. I talked about the low-level loop. I won't go into this slide too much. It was just more about really what I just said. So I do want to shift to the next poll. Someone could throw the poll up there. It's literally the same question we just talked about. Would your organization be comfortable letting AI evaluate its own work and loop again before a human sees it someday? Maybe not today, but someday. And there's no right answer with this question. Sorry, there's no wrong answer. Flip that around. There's no wrong answer with this question. All right, I think everyone's going to answer, probably answered at this point. We'll give it another 5 seconds to see if there's any more responses. I would say not super surprising results. Everyone's kind of, I'm not really, you're kind of set, they're all across the board, kind of even. We've got a few that are not sure, and it's even across the board. And I totally understand that. Lee, how do you feel about this currently?
I mean, I love to see the yes with the right guardrails. I like that's, I know it's only 33%, but it's also 33%. And I think that 4 years ago, that wouldn't have been the case. And even last year, I would say it would have been a lot lower. In fact, we did a lot of conversations with a lot of organizations, and so I'm not super surprised by that outcome, but I am happy to see because I feel like that number is growing, and I think it's the right answer, and I'm happy to expound on why and when we get there.
Yeah. Megan, how do you feel about those answers? How do you feel as a CFO with potentially what would have been your answer?
What would have been my answers? Yes, with the right guardrails. But admittedly, I would say our internal kind of AI journey, meaning me specifically being involved, has only really focused in the last, say, quarter. So if you had asked me that same question to Lee's point this time last year, I would have said, yep, nope, sorry, I don't trust that people will use it correctly, that we're not going to go crazy, that information doesn't become available, all the risks Lee brought up. I know where our internal AI governance journey is, which is why I would be comfortable saying yes with the right guardrails. I also understand not all companies are there, not there yet. So,
And that answer may be industry specific too.
sure.
There are going to be contexts where absolutely not going to ever do that. But even
Not
within
just
that company, yeah, go ahead, Tom.
and not just industry specific, I mean task specific too, right? I
Yeah.
mean, when we're talking about the right guardrails, we're talking from a usage perspective, a cost perspective, and of course an outcomes perspective.
And I think that's a really good statement for AI in general. AI is a tool, nothing more. And as soon as we think of it as more than a tool, we've stepped over a line. This is my opinion, obviously, now. We've stepped over a line. And we can talk about AI ethics in a later session, but it's a tool and it should stay in the tool realm. All right, so if we shift to what does governance look like from getting the right tooling to the people that make sense, we might look at something like telemetry. Telemetry being, I put in this thing, this prompt, what does it say about me and my maturity utilizing this tooling? Because if I'm more mature, right? If that data shows that the data around how I'm interacting with AI shows that I'm more mature, what do I probably have a better chance of getting, Megan?
More efficiency, better response, everything that you would want out of AI. As I said, that's even from my personal journey, right? I have not been as mature, and it makes neither me nor the system efficient as there is.
And because of that, if I say, Megan, I think I've shown that I'm more mature. May I please have?
Sure, of course, it makes it easier to then grant the access, especially higher level access that have higher costs, potential costs associated with it, rather than just everyone asking for a license and feeling as if there's no financial control then over usage.
Lee, you came off mute.
I did come off mute because Chris, you said I think I'm more mature, and I would ask for the receipts, right? Not from you, of course, but if it were, just somebody in the organization. Enthusiasm is great, right? Excitement around these tools and the possibilities with them is incredibly important. But we need to make sure that we're able to do a real assessment and evaluation and not just hand out access willy-nilly in order to maintain cost control, risk aversion, all the stuff that we look at in IT as a standing thing. And the nice thing about a feedback loop like this is that, it replaces a manual ledger in a way the manual ledger never could, because it's all data backfilled. Yes, you still have to look it over, validate it as you would with anything else, but it's all captured.
And I didn't necessarily call out what this feedback loop looks like. There are tools out there that will inspect across multiple different AI tooling what interaction looks like from your end users. How big were their prompts? Did they provide grounding documentation? So like the signals captured. What was the detail level within their prompts? How many back and forths did they get into a prompt loop with the AI? Therefore, maybe they're not super mature, but they're not necessarily prescriptive, but they're indicative. They're leading indicators to someone that is probably a little more mature on their AI usage journey than maybe others that started with the prompt that I had on step one, right? So this provides a feedback loop, not only for people moving up in the organization, but also what training do I need to continue to provide within the organization? to move people up in their maturity utilizing AI, making sure that people aren't putting social security numbers into, if you go back to, July's session and really kind of May's session on our YouTube channel, you'll definitely see us exercise the security side of that. But the other side is, how do I mature people, and what data is telling me that this is how I need to mature people when it comes to AI usage? Yeah, go ahead, Lee. You got
Yeah,
something
I
to
was
add?
just gonna say, I mean, I'm not gonna say never before, but like this is the capability of tracking this type of stuff is just uh so much more in your face than it has been historically in IT, and the costs can run up so much quicker because the per use is I don't want to say buried. You can find it and get it, right? It's easy to make it visible, but the end users aren't going to do that. Like that's not what they're using it for, and that's not unless you explicitly set a rule book and find a way. They're not worried about it in that regard. So this is where you mentioned continued education and
Mhm.
development and maturing your staff. It becomes so incredibly valuable.
Yeah. And this information leads us to which tiers of AI end user tooling do I end up giving people? And it's kind of two inputs there, as I see it. It's role based. So we're back to our RBAC discussion. By the way, there's a whole RBAC thing webinar that we did last year. This is no different. AI just happens to be another application. And based on their role, they will probably get a set of tooling, and they have to do the training for that role too. So it's not just I get the AI thing because I'm in this role. No, it's you're in that role, that therefore you have this training, complete the training, show that you are competent, maybe with a quiz or whatever it is, so that we end up being, because we're going to be held accountable for your usage within AI. So this starts to push them up, and use that feedback loop where you can push them up tiers. So this is intended to be an enabler, not we're not going to do the AI thing. How does this governance model from a financial standpoint feel for you, Megan? Does this make things more comfortable?
Of course, it gives me more comfort, but I'll say, Chris, you hit the nail on the head in the sense of, for me, it starts with the governance model. That needs to be in place that then we can rely upon to use, right? So this, I would say logically, this makes sense. People would say, yep, of course, it's based on roles and with training, but the first hurdle is getting that actual structural foundation within a company, but certainly from a financial perspective this now ties directly, right? So when Lee was saying, hey, sometimes it's hard to tie an input to an outcome, especially in AI, this starts to at least be a bridge between those where it seems gives a reasonable case of why certain levels of access are being provided to certain individuals instead of
Hmm.
willy-nilly. Now, what I said though, it's a case for. So I also wouldn't just say this is hard and fast and you have this job and this training and absolutely. There still needs to always be the use case, at those levels as well to make sure that I'll say from a financial perspective, we're comfortable with kind of letting go some of those reins. So.
Yeah. The only thing that I'll mention here is we did talk about the manual ledger. I didn't necessarily ground that in anything. Manual ledger is I'm doing this flow. It had this business outcome we kind of talked about at the beginning. That attribution is very hard to do. Not only from it's an opinion, but manual ledgers are just a process that dies over time. You see it time and time again. As much as I want it to work, people just won't fill it out. So why rely on it? So
Feel like you've
just
defined.
a
Oh,
oh, go ahead, Lee.
I was just gonna say, I feel like you've defined one of the major risks so that live with governance overall,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I'm just going to show this briefly. This, like I talked about earlier, at RedHelm, we have Copilot Chat as kind of the foundation, then we'll put Claude on top because it gives some level of financial predictability. And if I'm being a responsible AI user, I'm going to step into the cowork thing. I'm going to use my Copilot prompt coach. I'm going to step from a single prompt to a prompt chain to a co-work style thing when I need to, because I know that there's a timer on my Claude stuff. I only get so many credits a day. And I just need to be able to work within that. Within the Microsoft realm, there's quotas. You can set a quota for an individual, and you still have to take the same approach. And every other AI tool has the same approach in general. So as we're starting to close, and I know we're only getting about 5 minutes of Q&A, your AI tools are already keeping a record of who's ready for more. The question is whether your governance model is listening yet. There are tools to help you with this. And our advisory is here. We work with IT by Design to put flows in place, but our advisory here is to help put governance models in place. So the last 4 minutes, any questions out there? I didn't see necessarily anything in the chat as of recently. Anybody have any questions? I might ask some questions myself. No one's going to ask any. Megan, how do you feel about charging AI usage back to departments? And can you compare that with other things that you might charge back to departments?
Yeah, I would say absolutely you should be doing that, right? So in the sense of, and listen, this is going to be the debits or the costs sort of value case, but that's part of that department or entity operating. Any operation cost should be assigned to them. That should be, managed at that level, regardless of, Lee just mentioned it too. Regardless of what type of AI engine you're using, there is now that reporting that you can get to that level of usage, how much, things like that. So also from a financial burden perspective, I'd say those hurdles have been reduced so that you can effectively and efficiently kind of assign those costs. And just because one department uses more than the other, that doesn't mean it's bad or good. We also said, depending on the job, depending on the task, you'd expect different levels. And so that's also another gauge to say, does this seem reasonable based on the overall company spend? So absolutely.
All right, last question. Lee, this is a tricky question. This is more art than it is science.
Okay.
When should a workflow become an agent or reusable template?
I would say when you've run it enough times that you can describe it as like a fixed sequence instead of like a fresh decision each time. So if you're re-explaining the same context and reapproving the same kind of output over and over, that's the signal right there. That's telling you this is not novelty. This is not, wouldn't it be
This
cool?
is a part of our business.
Yeah, exactly.
We're part of our business. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I want to really thank Lee, Megan, you guys joining me today. This has been, a great webinar. Thanks to everyone joining. We look forward to seeing you on our next webinar in September. We're going to go through cloud economics and where you can find ways to save money within public cloud, private cloud, all the clouds. So thanks, everybody. Look forward to seeing you on the next one in September.
Great.
Bye.
Thanks
Thanks,
all.
everyone.